Hello and welcome to this Innova Systems webinar with me, Adam Rose. In this video, we're going to have a look at configurations within SolidWorks. We're just going to have a look at what configurations are within SolidWorks and what they allow you to do within the system. I've just taken SolidWorks' interpretation of configurations, and they define it as the ability to represent multiple versions of a part or assembly model within the same file. And this can be done by creating a second version and then suppressing or changing features, adjusting dimensions for geometry or mates, and that allows us to get slight alterations between files. The real advantage of something like a configuration is it allows a company to reduce the time taken for the production of, say, a second version of a design. It also allows us to reduce the amount of files on our storage system. So I'm just going to switch over to SolidWorks and I'll bring up a recent document that I'm using. Okay, so this configurations cabinet file. And what I'm going to do within here is to build up a number of different configurations to show different versions of how the cabinet could be put together. I'm actually going to deal with one of the smaller pieces for this cabinet first of all, which I haven't actually put in place yet, and that's this fascia part. Within the fascia, I've got a number of different styles that I could use within this design, and I've got sort of a triangular cut, which I'll get rid of the curved cut because they overlap each other, and then there's some fillets which bring that out a little bit, so I'll suppress those back again. So what we need to do is we need to suppress and unsuppress these features that I currently have all suppressed in order to create a number of different versions for the file. And we're also going to have a look at how to change dimensions when working with configurations. I find often the easiest thing to do when working with a file that contains configurations is to use what's known as a design table. A design table is SolidWorks' tabular view to creating configurations, and we can bring up a design table in a number of ways. We can bring up from a feature on the left hand side by choosing configure feature. Or if we've got, say, a dimension in the graphics area, we can configure dimension. And that will bring up a menu that will allow us to make some adjustments to the document. So I'm going to configure this curved cutout, because this is the item that I want to change within the file. You'll see currently I've got a configuration name called default. In every SolidWorks file you'll have a default configuration. If I want to create a range of different configurations within here, all I do is click in this column and then I just type in the name. So I'm going to type in fascia 2. Okay, so having created 4 different configurations, the settings for these have all been copied from the default because that's the active one. You can see which one's active by which one is shown with the bold lettering. If I was to double click on any of these other configurations, it activates them. And you'll see that there's no difference between these files at the moment. So I'll put myself back into the default. I want to add some extra columns into this table. You'll see I want to be able to configure more than one item at once. I'll bring in this triangular cut. You see it also gets added in. And I'm also going to bring in this triangular fillet. Okay, so at the moment all of these items are suppressed. What I want to do is create some different versions within this configurations table. So I'm going to turn on and off these items. If I untick the box, those items will be unsuppressed. So we need to activate all of those items where we want the items to be active. So I've currently got 2 configurations where we would have the triangular cut and 2 where we'd have the curved cutout. If we save this table away, we can give it a name. We need to give it a name before we can hit the save button. By clicking save, those changes are applied to the document. So then I'll click apply and OK. Now if we want to switch between any configurations within SolidWorks, we need to use the configurations manager. That's this tab here. So I'll switch to the Configurations Manager, and you'll see that I've currently got the defaults Fascia 2, Fascia 3, and Fascia 4. Okay, there's only slight differences between these at the moment. So what I'm going to do is just to rename default configuration. I just press F2 on my keyboard to do that. So having renamed that item, I can then bring the table back up to make some more changes to the document. To bring the table up, I just expand and then click Show Table. Okay, so currently we've just got features added within this table. If I want to bring in some dimensions, for example, I need to bring them up for the specific feature that I want to work on. And that's this rectangular cutout that cuts into the document. So I'll double click on one of the faces for that rectangular cutout, and you'll see the dimensions for it appear. You'll also notice that the rectangular cutout has been added into the table because we've double clicked it. So I'm going to double click on this dimension that I've named height and this dimension that I've named width. And then I'm going to delete this section out of the table. So I've now got 2 extra columns. Now you can bear in mind that if you've added dimensions for a particular feature, you can select other dimensions and other items to add in by hitting this down arrow that relate to these particular features. So because I've removed that suppressed column, I could bring it back in just by ticking this tick box. Okay, so having made those changes, I'm just going to adjust some of the sizes for this particular item. I'm going to adjust the size of this. So I've got a tall and thin one. And I'll do the same for the curved cutout. Okay, so having made that change, because I've added some new columns into the table, I now need to save the table again. And then I'll click Apply and OK. You can bear in mind that any changes that you make to the table, even if you don't save it, they'll still be applied to the configurations. You just won't be able to view that table in the same state again. So now if I switch between these configurations by double clicking, we'll see the different types of style that I've now produced. So I've got 4 different styles of fascia. What I'm going to do now is to save this away onto my computer. I'm going to come back to this file later on. So having switched back to the overall assembly, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up one of the elements of the design, and I'm going to build configurations into the door section. In the door section, I want to add some extra designs on this front panel. I'm going to start off by just putting in a new sketch. I'm going to draw a center line up the center, and then I'm just going to draw just a circle right in the middle. I'll just bring that right up to the top of the panel. So in this, I'm just going to use some splines just to get the rough kind of size and shape of this item. I'll do a slight flowery texture on the front of this. So having drawn these elements of the design out, I'm then going to trim away the excess. And obviously we need a closed loop for this extrude, so I need to mirror these items over. So I'm going to select Mirror Entities. And I'll use the center line in the design to mirror it over. Now ordinarily you'd usually, when you're constructing these items, you'd build in some extra parts in the design so that obviously when it comes to mirroring it over, you've got dimensions and everything like that to hold it in place. In this design, I'm not going to bother dimensioning up too much, just for the speed of creation. So having created the sketch, I'm now going to create an extrude from it. The extrude is just going to be a small extrude, just by 2 mil. And I'll finish it off just with some fillets. Now at this stage in the design, I'm going to create my configurations. At the moment, I've only got one within the design. It's just called standard. It's been renamed in this model. By default, you would have an item called default configuration. I'm going to create a new configuration just by right-clicking. And this is the other way to deal with configurations if you're not using a design table. You can go to your configurations manager and do it from here. We can enter in properties for this item, so the configuration name first of all. I'm going to call it panel detail. And I'll just type in a description. We can tick the tick box to use this description in the bill of materials if we want to. The other options we've got to play around with is the actual name that's going to be used in the bill of materials. If we're using several configurations of the same model within one assembly, we may want them to show up differently in a bill of materials. So you can either select the document name, the configuration name, or a specified name that you've created. I'm going to select the configuration name. The other option that's quite important is this suppress features option. What it does is it automatically suppresses all new features whenever you create a new configuration. So when we create a feature later on, it will be automatically suppressed in all other configurations. So at the moment, both configurations are exactly the same because they've been copied from one another. If we want to make any adjustments to one of the designs, say if we want to suppress a feature in the standard configuration, we simply go to the design tree, select the item we want to suppress, and just select the suppress from the menu that pops up. We then have two different configurations, the differences between them. The option that I was just talking about, that suppress features option, means that if we add any more features, they'll be automatically suppressed. So I'll show you that now. I'm going to add in a mirror from the top plane. I'm just going to mirror over these elements. You'll see now between the panel detail and standard configurations, if we go to the standard configuration, that mirror that I've just created is auto suppressed. Okay, so having created those changes within the door part of the model, I'm then going to save the design and I'll close it down. That won't have affected what's shown currently within the assembly because that configuration isn't selected. What I'm going to do now is to make some more adjustments to one of the other files. I'm going to open up this handle. Within the handle, I've currently got two different styles. I've got a Georgian style handle, and I've also got just a classical style handle made of wood. Okay, what I'm going to do between these two files is to adjust some of the other options that we can change. We can adjust the material, and we can also adjust the properties within these files between configurations. The first one I'll deal with is the properties. You see that we've got the custom tab for any standard properties that will be applied to the whole document. And we've also got this configuration specific tab. This allows me to apply, say, a description that we can add. So this description will be used in the bill of materials. So I'm going to type in a description for the item. Okay, and likewise for the other one, if we bring the menu up and we switch the apply to onto handle 2, we can then add a description for that item as well. Okay, So then within the bill of materials, that would be available for each specific configuration. Having applied that into the document, I also want to make some adjustments to the material that's used. To adjust the material, we can right click and use configure material, much like we did earlier on. It's the easiest way to deal with it because then we can select from a drop down list the available materials that we want to add in. So within this list, I'm going to choose pine, and I'm also going to choose brass. I've currently got it active in the Georgian style handle, so I'm going to choose brass first of all, and then I'm going to activate pine. We activated those two configurations. We could save this table if we wanted to, but because it only includes one item, there's not really much point. We can just bring it back up later on. So I'll click apply, click OK, and even though that change hasn't saved a table, you can see that we still have different materials applied to different parts of the document. And you'll also see that the appearance has changed with that material adjustment. So having made those changes, I'm then going to save this document, and I can switch back to the overall assembly. So at the moment, the overall assembly doesn't really look much different. We haven't really dealt with this yet. I'm going to make some more adjustments to individual part files so that then we can make adjustments to the whole assembly. So the first thing I'm going to do is to include a new file within this assembly as well. You can switch one file out for another. So I'm going to create a brand new document. And this is going to be a completely different style of handle. If we've got, say, a document which doesn't look anything like the original, we tend to do it as a separate file. So having applied those changes onto this drawing, I'm now going to set a revolve going. The revolve is going to go around the center, and instead of doing it by 360, I'm just going to have it going by 90. What I then want to do is to shell the document. Shell this item. I can remove this face that I've got selected, and I want to shell it by a distance of 2 millimeters, which will hollow out the center. Obviously, we also need to attach it onto the document, so I'm going to apply a hole-wizard hole onto this face that we can put in some kind of screw or bolt later on. So I'll put a countersunk hole on this file on the inside. I'll have it going through all, and I'll define the position. So using sketch references, I'm going to apply this so that it's vertically above the origin point. I also want to apply some kind of dimension to hold it in place as well. Okay, so having made that adjustment, I'll hit the tick. Okay, now I've just realised I wanted a diameter of 60, so I'm just going to adjust this dimension slightly. There we go, so that's more like the kind of size that I want it. So we made that adjustment. I'm now going to save this document away onto my computer. I'm going to call it cup handle. I'll hit the minimize button to then switch back to the assembly. So now I've made all of those adjustments. I'm going to go into this document and start configuring the overall assembly. First of all, though, I need to bring in that cup handle. Just bring it into the document, and then I can just add some standard mates. Now this handle is currently in the way, so I'm going to hide it out of the way. And then I can just add my mates into the document. Oops. Okay, so having added those three standard mates, this handle is now held in place. And you see that currently we've got two handles overlapping each other. So we need to choose with that configurations menu which one we're going to use and in which configuration. We've also got two styles of door. And later on I'm going to insert the fascia, which also has a number of different styles. So in order to start configuring this document, I'm going to select one of the items I want to configure, which is the cup handle. And I'll bring up the configure component button, which is the menu that we get within the assembly. For this item we can configure a number of items. It's not only the configurations of that document, but also whether it's suppressed or not. If we want to change dimensions for this document, we need to do the configuration within the file. We can change things like mates and the distance between components at an assembly level. I'm also going to bring in this handle, standard one that I created earlier on. Okay, and I'm going to double click on the door as well to bring that in. Now obviously I don't want to be able to adjust the configurations for this cup handle, so I can delete that section out. But I do want to be able to adjust the configuration. I also want to choose whether this one is suppressed or not, the handle too. The door, well, I also want to choose whether it's what configuration it's using, but I don't really need to suppress it at all. So this will be my table at the moment. The first changes I'm going to make is to add in some configurations. I'm going to add in 5 new ones. Okay. We can also rename the default if you need to by right clicking. I can name this item fascia 1. So we can then use this to choose which fascia we're going to add in later on. It gives us a bit of an indication of which one will be which. The cup handle, I'm going to adjust within here. I can suppress it in certain configurations, so I'll have two configurations where that item will be suppressed, and 2 where this one will be suppressed. I can then also choose which configurations I'm going to use. So the cup handle is unsuppressed in one configuration. So the configuration on my second handle I need to adjust. 2 at the Georgian style handle and 2 at the straightforward pine handle. I also need to choose the configuration of the door. Okay, so having chosen the configuration of the door, which configuration the straightforward pine handle is going to use and the cup handle, I can then give it a name. And I'll click Save, and then I'll click Apply. So if we switch through this document at the moment, we'll be able to see the adjustments that have been made. Fascia 2, Fascia 3 and 4, Fascia 5 and then 6. Okay, the next adjustments I can make within this document is to add in some new features. I'm going to add in that new component that we created earlier on, and we can add that from the Insert Components button. Before we do that, I want to switch back to it to make some more adjustments. So within this fascia document, I want to be able to control when I first insert the item which configuration will be selected. And we can do that in quite a nice way by using the Configurations Publisher, which you'll see is from the right-click menu, right-click at the top of the design tree. It automatically creates a design table for us, which is Excel based, and then we can use the Configuration Publisher to make the adjustments that we want. So we can see what the height, width of this document are. We can also bring in whether we're using the triangle cutout or the curved cutout, and we can just drag things straight into the graphics area to adjust those. Okay, so having added all these items in, we can then see a preview of what it will actually look like when we bring it into an assembly document. So you'll see you get the fascia height, which will then infer the fascia width, and we get whether it's a curved cutout, which will then infer whether the triangular cutout is turned on and off. So I'll switch between these different items, and we can update the model to see a preview of what it will look like. And we can switch between 50 and 70 with the curved cutout between fascia 1 and 2. But if we turn off the curved cutout, we can then get to fascia 3 and 4. So I'll then go back to this document and click Apply, and then close it down. So if I switch back to my overall assembly, I can then insert this item. And I've just added some standard mates in here, but you'll see the configurations publisher has popped up straight away. We've got the height and then the width. So I'm going to choose 70 and then the triangular cutout. Okay, that will choose fascia 4. I'll hit the tick. So I can bring this item into place just by using some smart mates, just by holding down the Alt key on the keyboard. Oops, I pressed Tab by mistake. So we can hold down Alt just to drag this into position. So that's now added 3 mates which have held this item in position. And then we can right click to make some adjustments to it. Now usually if you do want to adjust the configuration, you can go to the Component Properties menu. Component Properties allows you to choose between the different styles of configurations you've got active. You can also do it when you're inserting a component as well. If you click Browse, we can select a component, for example that fascia, and then we can select the configurations from a drop down. So you don't have to use the configurations publisher, but it's quite a nice way of being able to activate the different items. So having turned all those items on, I then want to configure this fascia, so I'm going to right click to configure that component. I can then choose which item I'm going to activate. So you can see we've got 2 with it suppressed, and then the rest I've got fascia 4, 3, 2 and 1. I'll click Apply and I'll click OK. And then we can switch between the different configurations to see the difference. Okay, so you can see the different configurations we can create quite easily within an assembly. It allows for a lot of different variation. What I'm going to do now is to save this document and then close it down. And I'm going to show another example of how we can use configurations within SolidWorks to make some adjustments. I'm going to open up this screwdriver. Now the screwdriver has been created with a number of surfaces. The boss extrude that actually creates the shaft of the screwdriver has been created with an up to surface end condition, which ends at one of those surfaces we created. What we can use within configurations is we can adjust the actual end conditions for something like an extrude or one of the features within SolidWorks to then get a variation in the actual feature itself. So I'm going to add a configuration. I'm going to call it Phillips head. I'll hit the tick. Now that I've done that, you can see that we can switch between these two documents, and currently there's no difference. But if I go to the Phillips head configuration, and then I show those two surfaces, so I'm going to show the surface knit this time, and I'll make sure surface offset is hidden. I can edit this feature to then choose, rather than having just half of the surface, the whole crosshead. I can hit the tick. Now, if you switch between configurations, like I have here, you'll see there's a difference between the files. The thing we really need to make sure when we're editing a feature and working between configurations is that the configurations box, when we're actually editing it, is set to this configuration, or specify configurations if you have multiple items that you want to apply that change to. Otherwise, you'll find those changes you make won't go through to each item. So then we can make other features apply into the document. For example, I'll go onto this item and I'll add in some chamfers on the edge. I'm going to apply those to each side. Okay, and then we've got something that actually looks quite like a Phillips head screwdriver. The variation between these two files allows us to get multiple different shapes of screwdriver just by using the same features. So we don't have to create new features and then suppress them. We can just adjust the end conditions if we're clever about the way we do it. So what about if we want to adjust dimensions between configurations? If we're not using a design table, we can bring those dimensions up in the graphics area. We can double click to edit them, and then you'll see you've got a configurations list on the right hand side. So I'm going to make this change in just this configuration, and I'll make some adjustments, and I'll hit the rebuild. And then we should start to find that when we switch between these documents, we've got a different length handle and a different head. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a good idea of all the kind of things that you can actually do with configurations. Quite variable in what you can achieve, and they allow you to get a lot of different versions of SolidWorks files. So thanks very much for watching.